Good evening, everybody, and welcome in to another edition of Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports. This is episode 57. Welcome in here tonight, coming to you live from Houston, Texas, Wednesday, April 3rd, 10:20 p.m. We have a loaded show for you guys today. If you're tuning in live by chance, make sure, first of all, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button if you're not already, and leave some comments, engage in the show, ask some questions. If you're a fan of the Longhorns, give us your thoughts on spring football, as we're about halfway through spring practice and about a little over 2 weeks from the spring game. Give us your thoughts on the Final Four, which we will be previewing in this episode on both sides, men's and women's. Give us your thoughts on Texas baseball if you're into that. We'll get into all of that stuff and more on tonight's show. But before we do that, let me welcome in, as always, my esteemed co-host, fellow Longhorn fan, a busy man himself, Mr. Nixon. What's up?
What's up, man? Feeling good tonight. Long day at work. I'm ready to talk some sports, man. This is what we do. I'm excited.
All right, well, let's do it. So we're going to kind of have 4 segments on tonight's show, so we're going to have to move swiftly. Of course, we won't rush through anything to, sacrifice something else. If we have to, we can push the recruiting stuff to the next show. But let's start off with what I think is, and most people, I think, across the industry, in the media, think is the most anticipated women's Final Four ever. We've got number 3 seed NC State going up against undefeated and number 1 seed South Carolina in the first game on Friday night at 6 p.m. And then at 8 p.m., we're going to have the matchup that I think a lot of people are looking for, and that is number 3 UConn and number 1 Iowa. As you can see, the spreads are there at the bottom. We might get into that. We might get into some predictions. But let's start with your overall thoughts on the Final Four. What are the storylines you're most looking forward to? Is there a certain team that you're most interested in talking about? Obviously, we know about Caitlin Clark, but outside of that, is there a certain storyline or team that you're most interested in discussing right off the bat?
Well, for me, I look at Iowa and their matchup with UConn as extremely intriguing because you look at what UConn did to Juju Watkins. They sent 2 to the ball consistently. They really threw the kitchen sink at Juju Watkins, and it'll be interesting to see if they can actually do something similar with Caitlin Clark. If they have the personnel to actually be able to send to the ball on those high pick and rolls all the way, 30, 35 feet from the basket, like Caitlin likes to run. So that's the first thing. I think that's a super intriguing matchup just because of the style of play. UConn plays like a really just tenacious style of defense. And obviously Iowa, when Caitlin Clark is cooking, there's really not a whole lot you can do to stop that offense. It feels like so. That to me is the storyline I look at. But obviously, the one that's I think is getting overlooked right now is the fact that South Carolina is undefeated right now and could potentially head into a national championship game looking to complete a perfect season. Their star player Camila Cardoso just uh, declared for the WNBA draft a few days ago, and I think if we're to rank the star player for each of these teams, I would probably have her two right behind Caitlin Clark. And the South Carolina team, they're a complete squad, and I think they'll be a tough matchup for anybody. Like I really don't see a scenario where. Actually, I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to make any predictions just yet. But the point is, South Carolina is getting overlooked right now.
They're getting overlooked as much as a 36-0 team can get overlooked. Camila Cardoso is fantastic. She is a top 3 player in this Final Four, no doubt about it. You have Caitlin Clark, you have Paige Beckers, who people still aren't talking about enough for what she's done in this tournament for UConn. I think for South Carolina, the thing about them is they are the most balanced team in the Final Four. You talk about what happened to UConn early on in the season when they just had some of the worst injury luck I think I've ever seen a basketball team have, pro or college, when they lost, I think it was 4 players for the season that would have seriously contributed to this squad. And they've really been running, a 6 or 7 lady rotation for most of this. It's been pretty squeezed rotation for most of this season, but give credit to Gino Auriemma, a guy who's been through 5 undefeated seasons himself and has won 11 national championships. Just insanity what he's done with this version of UConn. They've been playing 3 freshmen, and here they are. They find themselves once again in the Final Four. But back to South Carolina, I mean, you talk about their balance. Between the guards and the forwards, they've had 4 different leading scorers in each tournament game so far. So that just goes to show you, like, they have certain players that can get it done night to night to night. And they've had 9 different players score in each of their past 3 tournament games. So when I talk about balance, that's what I'm really talking about. And I think they're going to make it tough on NC State, but NC State is a team that, has played really well so far in this tournament, and they're getting excellent guard play. We talk about guard play and how it's so important on the men's side. Well, the same can be said for the women's side. This was a Wolfpack offense that was averaging only 58 points in their 3 games coming into the tournament. And in their past, 3 games in this tournament, they're averaging close to 78 points per game. And that came against Tennessee, Stanford, and Texas, which were the number 34, number 8, and number 3 defense, respectively, in the country. They've got Azia James. They've got Wes Moore, who have really turned it on. They flipped the switch. They're scoring at all 3 levels. And so I think the guard matchup here will be really interesting with those 2 players who are hot, especially Azia James, who shot 7 for 9 on threes and was the chief reason NC State was able to upset Texas was their 3-point shooting, against the guard play, the balanced guard play for South Carolina. When you talk about South Carolina coached by Don Staley, I mean, they've got a multitude of different options they can go to themselves. So I'm interested to see that. And how does NC State counter Carmela Cordosa? That'll be interesting. But I think I'd go with South Carolina to win this. They're just too balanced and too deep.
Yeah, I agree. I think South Carolina's best punch is probably the best left in this tournament. And that's even with Caitlin Clark existing. And that's saying a lot. So, like you mentioned, the balance, and I think just the more players you have that can go out and get a bucket when the shot clock is running down, the better. And they're a team that if they have one player, go down for foul trouble or whatever the case is, they have so many other players that can step up and have stepped up so many times before. So I really don't see them having much of an issue.
Yeah. Here's the final thing I'll say on that game, and then we can kind of move on to what I think is the more talked about and more anticipated matchup. The Gamecocks are going to win this entire thing if they play at their top level. I think when this South Carolina team plays their A game, plays their A+ game, they're going to be really hard to beat. Much like I think UConn on the men's side, when they're on their game, like they were for like 3/4 of the game against Illinois, they're going to be really tough to beat. Doesn't mean they can never be beat, but they're going to be really tough to beat because South Carolina, as I just reinforced, if their numbers 1, 2, and 3 options aren't working, they have a number 4, 5, and 6 that they can go to, that they can rely upon, and they have been able to rely upon all season. And if they're not shooting the ball great, which some teams like maybe an NC State kind of have to rely on and have relied on to get them here, they're a fantastic rebounding team, and they can punish you on the inside. So I think if Staley can mix and match their personnel to kind of play the hot hand, and they play like just a well-balanced, well-oiled machine that they have been, that's gotten them to 36-0, it's going to take a monster performance from one of the two stars on the other side of the bracket to, I think, take them down. Now, for NC State, just real fast, if they want to win this game against South Carolina, they got to do what they did against Texas, and that's make a lot of their perimeter shots, make a good amount of them, because that was their strength. They made 16 threes against Texas. They shot 16 for 35 on three-pointers against Texas. That's almost 50%. I mean, it's going to take, I think, kind of that kind of effort to have a chance to beat South Carolina. Okay. Your thoughts on UConn, Iowa? What are the keys in this game? What are you looking for? And who are you picking to win?
Well, the main question to look at in this game is how does UConn defend the high pick and roll with Caitlin Clark? LSU early in that game decided to go under the ball screens, which was a death sentence, and really just didn't make much sense. But later on in the game, once they started to run some drop coverage, some hedging, they were able to mix it up a little bit more and had a little bit more success. But by that point, Caitlin Clark had already found her rhythm, and it was already too little too late. So I think for UConn, the one thing that I think of when I think of their offense is just polish. And that's why I think with how well they defend and how well they execute on the offensive end, I think they are a really tough matchup for Iowa. I really do. And I think the size on the interior that they present will also be a challenge for Iowa. Iowa is a relatively small team on the interior, and you saw that against LSU early on in that game before Reese got a little bit tired towards the end of that game. she was having her way inside, and all those bigs on the LSU side of the ball, they were getting the offensive rebounds, and that's going to be a concern, I think, for Iowa in this game. I still think Iowa has a great chance. They have the best player on the floor, but to me, I think UConn is the more complete team based on what I've seen. I think Iowa, they've gotten great production from their secondary and third scorers, which has been great. But where I see them struggling in this game is on the defensive side of the ball. I question whether they'll be able to get enough stops against Paige Beckers in this UConn offense and how well they execute. To give you an example of what I'm talking about, like there was a baseline out of bounds play in the third quarter of that USC game where Paige Beckers came around a screen, a pin down screen, got to the corner and ended up with a wide open shot off of a baseline out of bounds play. Like little things like that. I just think their execution is just fantastic. And I think the level of coaching, the level of preparedness, that's why I'm leaning UConn in this game.
The key for UConn is going to be, in my opinion, the play of Aaliyah Edwards. She's been the Robin to Becker's Batman for much of this season and in this tournament. You saw it.
And just to that's their center, right?
Yeah, it's their post big.
Okay, yeah. That's who I was thinking of as well. Yeah. Couldn't remember her name.
She's a senior, so she has experience. And that's something that really, if you look past Beckers and Edwards, UConn doesn't really have a lot of it. They would have if their injury luck wasn't so terrible. But with that circumstance, if you look past Edwards and Beckers, it's 3 freshmen, and that's really about it. That's the concern for UConn is lack of depth. And if, say, Beckers or Edwards happen to get in foul trouble, that would spell trouble. But I think if Aaliyah Edwards, because I think Beckers and Clark are going to play great games. Like I think Caitlin Clark is just at a point where, I mean, hell, in the first quarter of the game against LSU, I didn't even think Clark played all that great. She had like 3 bad turnovers.
Yeah.
Wasn't making a whole.
She didn't play near her best, and she still had 41, 12, and 7.
Well, yeah, I mean, she heated up later on in the game, especially in the second half. She was awesome. But in the first quarter, she didn't look all that great. She still was scoring because she's just that good. But she had some turnovers. And so I think Beckers and Clark will get theirs. For UConn, though, it's about Edwards. Because what she's done this season, averaging 17.5 points on close to 60% shooting with 9 rebounds, I think UConn's going to need something similar to that, or maybe even a little better if they want to win, because Iowa's not the biggest team in the world. They kind of like to spread you out, and
play fast.
They play fast, right? Like they got dominated on the boards against LSU. They won the game, but that was an issue for them going into the game, and it turned out that until Angel Reese kind of got in some foul trouble, and Iowa was able to kind of spread them out more offensively. They were able to, LSU was getting inside at will. And so Aaliyah Edwards, I think, is the key for UConn. If she can score inside and kind of open it up a little more for Paige Beckers, that's great. Because I do think the one area where I think Beckers is more advanced than Clark is defensively. I think her instincts, and just her skills and want to on the defensive end of the floor are just a little bit better than Clark at this point. So I don't know. We'll see what happens with that. For Iowa, it's all about Clark. If she continues to do what she did in that LSU game, it's likely that Iowa will win this game because when she scored 35 or more this year, they're 12-1. And when she records double-digit assists, the aspect of her game that the casuals don't talk about enough, her passing and her playmaking, especially on those look-ahead passes on the fast break. When she records double-digit assists this year, they're 20-1. They're really hard to beat. And so I think, if she keeps playing like this, sometimes you just run into like an all-time great player. And that's really kind of what we're looking at here with Caitlin Clark. Wright Thompson wrote a fantastic article. It's long. It's really long. And I've yet to get through all of it yet. So maybe we'll talk about it next week, kind of when we're wrapping up the season and stuff. Because I don't know if you've read it yet. But yeah, I think that's what we're kind of looking at here with Caitlin Clark. But something I will say about Caitlin Clark is I can tell that she's improved on kind of controlling her emotion and with some of the body language stuff that people complained about last year. I can tell that she's improved upon that. And so hopefully that continues. I'm just excited to watch this game. That Iowa LSU game was some of the highest level women's basketball I think I've ever watched. It was great, fast flowing, smooth basketball with shot making all over the place, hustle, physicality, it had all of it.
And I got to give credit to the refs as well. That game, they didn't fuck it up, which is good.
So are you going? I'm going to go just because I want to see Caitlin Clark against South Carolina with an opportunity to beat. Like if Caitlin Clark beats UConn and then puts on an incredible performance to kind of disband a potential South Carolina undefeated season, that would really kind of cement her place as like an all-timer.
Like that would probably be one of the greatest college careers in like any sport.
Yeah, exactly.
All time.
Because I think it's unfair, but a lot of people, I guarantee you, a lot of the social media loudmouths, if she doesn't win a championship, are going to say, I'm not saying this is right, but they're going to say, well, she didn't win a championship, and that all that kind of stuff. So I don't know. We'll see.
I will be rooting for Iowa, just to be clear. But I think, I'm gonna pick UConn, but I will be rooting for Iowa 100%.
I don't know if I'm rooting for. I mean, I'd love to see UConn too. I just think Iowa has a better chance of beating South Carolina. But what do I know? Do we have anything else to talk about here? Did we miss anything?
Well, just one last thing. I think if I'm UConn, you got to keep Caitlin Clark from going to her left hand, especially on the left wing. Those left wing 3-pointers, it's almost Luka-like with like how proficient she is on those left wing 3-pointers off the dribble. Like moving to her left, she's a lot more comfortable getting that shot off. So if I'm UConn, I just got to avoid that at all costs. It seems like when she gets to like the free throw line area, she's a little bit less comfortable because she doesn't really have a in-between shot just yet. So you got to run her off the line at all costs. It'll be interesting to see how they do it, but it's gonna be a tough challenge no matter what.
Gino Auriemma joked in one of his media availabilities, I think it was either today or yesterday, that he hopes that Caitlin Clark jokingly had a personal agenda against LSU because he hopes that, in theory,
We'll take it easy on them.
yeah, he does. She doesn't have that against UConn, and it might be a little different. That's kind of like a joke. And
Yeah.
he basically flat out said, like, I hope she doesn't drop 50 on us. So we will see. Flipping to the men's side now, as you can see, NC State and UConn are mainstays in this year's Final Four, both on the men's and women's side. So on the men's side, we've got an 11 seed in the Final Four with NC State, who I think, as of right now, are on a, including the conference tournament, minimum 9-game win streak. Might be more than that, but 9 that I can remember.
I mean, they won 5 games in 5 days in the ACC tournament, and now
Four
I
games.
think it's four games in a row. So yeah, 9.
9-game winning streak after losing, I think it was 4 or 5 to end the regular season. They're going to go up against Zach Edey and Purdue. Matt Painter gets the job done. He gets to a Final Four finally. They will face Purdue in the first game, and then Alabama, who got here despite many people questioning their defense and their ability to win a lot of these games. They'll go up against,
including me. I'll raise my hand on
they'll
that.
go up against the powerhouse that is the UConn Huskies. Can anyone stop the Husky Express? That's the question that we've been asking, and it's yet to happen. In fact, nobody's really come close. But let's start with NC State and Purdue. What are you looking for? Of course, I know what I'm looking for, but what are you looking for?
I'm looking at that center matchup.
Yeah,
DJ Burns, Zach Edey. I mean, I don't know if there's a more fun player to watch than DJ Burns right now, and if there is one, then it's probably Zach Edey. DJ Burns, it's crazy how coordinated and skilled he is at that size. Like he moves just so smooth, and he's able to make so many passes, and he's got a polish to his offensive game that I wouldn't have really expected, to be honest. He's been really, really impressive. And then, of course, on the other side of it, how are they going to handle Zach Edey? No one's been able to do it. Zach Edey has been completely dominant all tournament long, including, I think he drop, 35 and 17 or something in one of those games. I can't quite remember what the exact stat line was, but it was something ridiculous. But Purdue, their 3-point shooting around him has just been, I mean, it's delivered. I just don't think they're due for a cold spell. I think this is just who they are. And NC State, I think they can score with them to an extent. I think they'll be able to hang, but I would give the edge to Purdue.
Here's what I like about NC State. Number one, they're a team that can play a lot of different styles. And you've seen that so far here in this tournament. They can play at a quick tempo, or they can play at a more deliberate pace. They're fine with doing both. They can play a more loaded lineup with bigs, or they can play with 4 guards with DJ Burns on the floor. They guard well against the 3. That's something they've done well the entire tournament. You look at, Texas Tech really wasn't able to shoot it all that great in that first game. Oakland, although they did shoot it some, didn't go nuts like they did against Kentucky. Marquette wasn't really making a lot of shots. And then Duke kind of went cold. They have guarded the 3 well. Marquette and Duke, by the way, combined to shoot 9 of 51, 18% from 3-point range against NC State. Some of that is, of course, missing shots, but a lot of it is the shots that NC State makes you take. I do think, and I do kind of worry just a little bit about NC State's guards, and if they're able to kind of get up into Braden Smith and Fletcher Loyer. They are good perimeter defenders. Casey Morcell, who's a transfer from Virginia. Um, you talk about Ben Middlebrooks. You talk about, they've got a lot of different pieces that are solid defenders. They run you off the three-point line. And they've also kind of protected the rim fairly well. So I think defensively, NC State's solid. It'll just be about playing that defense without fouling. And typically when you play Purdue and Zach Edey, the force that be, it generally requires a lot of fouling. And that's where I worry about NC State. This is a team that can go 7 deep without much trouble, but if one or two get in some foul trouble, that would be time to sound the five ring alarm. I mean, I worry about their depth if fouls start piling up, but at the same time, Kevin Keats has done a fantastic job of kind of mixing and matching his lineups in this tournament. NC State is hot. They're on a magical run, and sometimes, these things can, once they get rolling down the tracks, they can, keep going. But I don't think they're going to have enough for Zach Edey, and I do think Purdue has answered all the questions they need to answer. And Lance Jones gives them an element they did not have last year. So yeah. I will roll with Purdue, and I do think they'll cover the 8.5. I think NC State will hang around for a while, but eventually Purdue will show why they're here.
Yeah, I think they'll make their run probably 15 minutes, 12 minutes left in the second half, and then it'll pretty much be smooth sailing from there. I kind of see it as NC State, can they just have the stamina to just bang with Zach Edey for 40 minutes? I mean, it's a grind, man. Like trying to guard that dude for an extended amount of time with any one player, like it's gonna be interesting to see how they allocate that. But you can't really double because of all the shooting, and Zach Edey has shown that he can make the reads. And Zach Edey has been, I think, really decisive as well. As people haven't given him enough credit, I think, in terms of he's seeing the floor really well from that in that high-low game where he's catching the ball in the middle of the paint. He's able to make reads from there, and I think that's been a really key part of this Purdue offense humming like it is.
Yeah, and another key part has been Fletcher Loyer. He's got a rich basketball history himself. He was a standout high school player in Michigan and Indiana, where he won State Player of the Year back in 2022. His brother, Foster Loyer, played at Michigan State and Davidson. His father is actually an NBA scout. And his Purdue ties are strong as his grandfather played for the Boilermakers. And his mother is a former assistant for the Purdue volleyball team, women's volleyball team. So, yeah, I mean, he's got all the connections in the world, and he's been what they've needed him to be in this tournament. He's averaging 12 points per game to go along with what Braden Smith is doing. And he's shooting 46% from beyond the arc, which is just ridiculous.
And it's been such timely shots as well. Like, it's just been such an impactful 12 points.
We've said this over and over, and it hasn't happened yet. If the three-pointers stop falling, though, like they did on Sunday against Tennessee, Purdue could get themselves into a little bit of a scary situation. But that just doesn't happen very often for a team that all season has shot the three ball exceptionally well. They came into this tournament ranked second nationally in three-point shooting. They've continued that. So I guess if you're looking at just the profiles of these teams and the kind of how they match up on paper, it's that NC State defense that's good at running you off the three-point line and good at closing out on those shots, and Purdue, which has been exceptional, maybe the best three-point shooting team in this tournament. Because while UConn's been dominant, they haven't really shot the three ball all that great. It's been more Alabama that you could say is like the dangerous team from three, at least in this tournament. But that's what it really comes down to for me. And then DJ Burns against Zach Edey will be just really fun to watch. But Alabama, UConn. Here's the question. What does Alabama have to do to beat UConn? if there's anything that they can do to beat UConn, what is it?
They got to win a track meet. They got to do what they've been doing all year, which is win track meets. And I don't say that as a slight to what they've been defensively in this tournament. They've been fantastic at times in this tournament defensively, and it's been really amazing to see. But with all that being said, though, they're gonna win with offense, and that's what they've been doing all year. They have so many different weapons on offense, and I love the pace that they play with. Nate Oates, I think showing why he's one of the best coaches in college basketball with this run. I think the amount of shooting that they have, the amount of the pace that they play with, I think, UConn is so good in that they can play your pace and still feel comfortable. They can play a defensive battle and still feel comfortable. But I think at the same time, though, Alabama definitely has a different gear offensively than a lot of the teams that UConn has played, and it'll be interesting to see how Alabama is able to kind of spread out this UConn team and maybe force Donovan Clingan to kind of space out and out of the paint a little bit more. But even with that, UConn is just, they're on a different level right now. I don't like, as much as I like Alabama, and as much as I am intrigued by the matchup, and I think Alabama will give them a fight, maybe more so than Illinois did, but UConn has just been untouchable.
You're an NBA guy. I am too, but you're bigger than I am. I was listening to the Mismatch podcast with Kevin O'Connor and Chris Vernon a couple days back, and I think it was on Monday, and they were kind of talking about the potential NBA guys in this tournament that have impressed them. And while he's only a freshman, I think it was it was both of them really that made kind of a comparison. And the comparison was, and I want to get your thoughts on this, Mark Sears, Alabama's fantastic, outstanding freshman point guard. They compared him to a mini Jalen Brunson. What do you think of that?
Sears has got a different gear as well, too. I think I can see the comparison in terms of they have a way of just getting to their spots, and they know where they want to get to. They know where they want to get to on the floor. Yeah,
that's exactly what their reasoning was. Yes, you nailed it. I can see it as well. I don't know if it's a perfect comparison. He also just kind of looks like Jalen Brunson in a way. Like if you look at it,
he kind of has that same build.
Yeah. He kind of has the same build. He kind of looks like him in the face if you really kind of squint and look at him, you can kind of see it. Yeah, I thought it was interesting that they brought that up. But in terms of this game, I think, and the guys on the field of 68 were talking about this: John Fanta, Rob Doster, Jeff Goodman, John Henson, Randolph Childress. It's just fantastic. They were talking about this earlier today, and really what I think it comes down to for Alabama is, as you mentioned, they're going to have to win a track meet. But I don't think they can trade twos for twos. I think they're going to need probably 15 or more threes to win this game. Because I just don't think, as long as Donovan Clingan is on the floor and not in foul trouble, it would really help one of these teams to get Clingan in foul trouble finally. Because I think that's really your best chance at beating UConn. Because in my opinion, he's like, did you watch that Tennessee game? I mean, I think it was the Sweet 16.
The second half of it.
No, it was the Illinois game. I think Illinois shot 0 for 19 on shots that were contested closely by Donovan Clingan. Like, he's just ridiculous as a rim protector. He is the most impactful defensive player in this tournament. And so if he's on the floor, you're likely not going to have a ton of success in the paint. So you got to make your outside shots. And they have the personnel to do it. It's the style that Nate Oates likes to run. That's why they're here. That's what got them there. So they can do it. But it is a tall task to make that many three-pointers game after game after game. So it'll be up to Mark Sears and some of those other guys, Aaron Estrada, whoever it might be, to really shoot the three ball well. That's where they can really get UConn and put pressure on them on the other end. Because although UConn has some personnel that really can shoot the three, I mean, Cam Spencer, Alex Caravan are fantastic usually from out there, and Tristan Newton has had spurts where he can knock down shots from out there. They haven't really done it all that well in this tournament, and that's all the more impressive. It's amazing because it hasn't mattered. It's going to be really Mark Sears, Grant Nelson, Aaron Estrada, and those guys making shots from the perimeter. Grant Nelson's been great in the tournament. And when we talk about Alabama, we can't mention where they've been and where they've gotten without mentioning the play of Nick Pringle, who's really stepped up on the inside for Alabama.
Yeah.
But for you, I'm rolling with UConn. They were my pick before the tournament. I think they're approaching a territory where you can make the argument that this is one of the greatest teams of all time over the past years.
They're getting there.
I mean, this run has been absolutely incredible. I think they're winning. They've won their first 4 games in this tournament by more than they did in last year's tournament. In last year's tournament, they were dominant. I think they won their first 4 games by a combined 111 points. I don't know what that exactly averages out to, but it's more than 25 points per game. It's closer to like 27, 28 points per game, if you kind of roughly do the math in your head. It's Clingan in foul trouble. And then can you disrupt what they do offensively? Because they can do it. They can run. They can slow it down. They can run their offense. They can take it deep into the shot clock and find a good shot. And it's just tough. Like, it just really is. I don't know. I don't know if they'll win by 30. I think this will be a closer game, but it just seems like every time I say that, I'm wrong. So we'll see.
Yeah. And here's the scenario in my head for Alabama. Like, obviously you got to get Klingon in foul trouble, as you mentioned, but I think it's also you got to hit the threes early and get out to a little bit of a lead. I think that's going to be essential because if you can hit your threes early and make UConn think like, oh, maybe like kind of in a similar way to what the Clippers did to Rudy Gobert a few years ago. It's a different situation, but kind of in the same light a little bit. If you can hit your threes enough to where UConn has to kind of consider going small ball a little bit, then you got a real shot, I think.
Yeah.
But if Klingon is able to just stay on the floor and dominate this game on the glass and in the paint, then it's going to be tough sledding.
Yeah. It will be. I'm picking the Clash of the Titans, Purdue and UConn, to match up on Monday night. That's what everyone wants to see. That's what everyone's here for. Outside of Houston, those two teams were definitely the most consistent start to finish this year. And it's rare that we've gotten a matchup of two Titans, especially big man like Donovan Klingon and Zach Edey, to match up on Monday night for the championship. That game would be awesome.
Yeah.
And so that's what I'm picking. On the women's side, I'm picking Iowa and South Carolina. So there you have it. Anything else on the Final Four?
No, that's it for me.
I actually want to real fast, since I have the lower third made, get into these recruiting updates, if that's okay with you. It'll be
yeah, for sure.
It'll be relatively quickly. So we haven't really talked recruiting in a while because we had the February dead period where players weren't taking official visits and nothing was really going on. Players were kind of scheduling their official visits for this summer. Most of these players in the 2025 class, most of the top players, especially in the state of Texas, they like to get their decisions done before their senior season start, so that way they can just solely focus on their senior seasons. Because they want to keep up their ratings and, put good tape out there.
Yeah.
And some, will probably flip, later on the cycle, but that's really what's been going on. And March came around. There's been some more action, players taking unofficial visits, that kind of thing. But the Longhorns, as we know, are really patient in their approach to taking commitments in this early, because this staff under Steve Sarkisian likes to chase rather than defend, meaning they would rather have a big-time prospect stay uncommitted or even commit to another program and have to kind of chase after that prospect to try and pry him away from that other program rather than having to babysit, a big time prospect that's committed to you, but maybe is
keep them from running off
take
like a Brew McCoy.
Kind of getting unsure. Like they'd rather be the chaser rather than on the defensive.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about Decorian Moore in a loaded wide receiver class, 5-star wide receiver out of Duncanville High School, the same high school, powerhouse football high school that Colin Simmons and others have come out of, right? Go watch Decorian Moore's hull. It's ridiculous. He's the top player right now, in my opinion, in the state of Texas, flat out. And that's what he's rated by Rivals. And he's top 5 on, I think, all the other major sites within the industry. He's currently committed to LSU. And he committed to LSU shortly after Colin Simmons committed to Texas. And when you look at LSU's class right now, they've got a lot of high-profile guys already kind of committed to them. They have a high-profile quarterback, they've got a running back, and they've got a receiver. So they kind of got the trio. And Decorian Moore has been pretty solid in his commitment to LSU ever since he committed back in, I think Colin Simmons committed in August. So it was sometime August, early September. But now that the dead period's over, and he's still come out in interviews in recent weeks and said, I'm still solid to LSU. But sometimes actions speak louder than words in recruiting. And he was in Austin this past weekend for the Texas Relays. So he was on campus. He wasn't on a recruiting visit, but he was on campus in Austin. He's going to be back in Austin for an unofficial visit this weekend, April 6th. I think that's, what would that be, Saturday? To watch practice, just an unofficial visit with the coaches and stuff. Then he's going to come back to Austin on April 20th to watch the spring game for another official visit. And then he's scheduling an official visit for June to Texas. So by the time this is all said and done, that's going to be, by the time we get past the spring game, that'll be 3 visits to Austin in 5 weeks. And that'll be another one in June sometime, or July, right before he kind of makes his decision. And people without the industry think, wow, he's kind of narrowed it to 4 schools, and there are 3 other schools that are really kind of going after him. It's Texas, Ohio State, and Oregon. While he's committed to LSU, people throughout the industry think this is really a LSU-Texas battle. It's going to be LSU or Texas for Decorian Moore. And right now, Texas is right in the position they want to be with Decorian Moore. While he's maybe solid in his commitment to LSU, they've got a lot of time, and they're getting him on campus 2 times in the next 3 weeks and another time in the summer. So I think that's a really good sign for Decorian Moore, because it's all about, a lot of recruiting is about getting these kids exposure, getting them on campus, allowing them to visit with the coaches, let them see the campus. Are they a good fit at the school? Let them watch spring practice. How are things done in the program on a day-to-day basis? How are practices run? How much time are the freshmen getting in these spring practices? Like, there's a lot that goes into it that not a lot of people think about. And it's important that, especially for a kid of this high profile committed to another school right now, Texas is able to get him on campus. Because most kids don't commit to schools without visiting the schools. It's kind of like, I'd imagine, at least for me, or most people I know, they didn't go to the college they went to without visiting the college before they, actually decide to go there. So, that's it for Decorian Moore. And then 5-star offensive tackle Michael Fasusi out of Louisville, Texas, Louisville High School. The best offensive tackle, the best offensive lineman in the state of Texas, and I think a top 10 prospect overall in the entire country. It's thought to be, since this recruiting process started, to be a Red River battle for Michael Fasusi. It's thought to be Texas or Oklahoma. But recently, in the past 3-4 weeks, he's made 2 unofficial visits to Texas A&M. So Texas A&M might be dipping their toes into this recruitment with Mike Elko and that new coaching staff. But he recently came out with a top 7, and I don't pay too much attention to top 7s, top 5s in recruiting. Like, when kids release, they're narrowing down their list of schools to 7 or 10 or 8 schools. I don't really pay all that much attention to that. But Texas did make that list. He is going to take I think he is going to be in town for the spring game, and then they're going to get him back in for an official visit. And I'm pretty confident with where they stand right now on Michael Fasusi, although he has made a lot of other visits to Oklahoma. So we'll see where that stands. But I think in terms of these two prospects, which are two of the more higher touted prospects in the state and most sought after prospects for Texas in this entire recruiting class at two really key positions, you can feel really good where we stand here in early April. Still fairly early on in this 2025 recruiting process where Texas stands on both of these guys. So do you have any reaction to those updates?
Well, I've heard you speak of Decormian more for a while now. You've talked very highly of him over and over and over again. But the interesting battle is obviously going to be to me right now is going to be the offensive tackle one, because with Kelvin Banks, like 99.8% sure to be in the NFL draft come next year, the offensive tackle position immediately becomes a need. So that battle with him possibly having, 2 5-star guys in the pipeline with the guy that we got this year, that would be huge.
Yeah, Brandon Baker is one of those guys who I think will be kind of important to see what he does in the spring and or what he's been doing in the spring, and then what is his role going into the fall? Like, where does he sit? Because the offensive tackle position is a fairly interesting position right now on the 40 acres, because you have Kelvin Banks, who, if he plays like he's just been playing the past 2 years, is going to be likely a top 10 pick in next year's draft.
Maybe even top 5.
Maybe, if he stays healthy. And
right,
you have Cam Williams, who's from that 2022 recruiting class. Another highly recruited, highly touted prospect, who I think likely going to start the year at right tackle. He's the guy that's being called upon to replace Christian Jones.
right.
And then behind those guys, you have Trevor Gooseby, who is a monster of a human being, just a freak. Heard a lot of good things about him in spring practice. He's the guy right now that's currently the backup to Kelvin Banks. If something were to happen to Kelvin Banks, he would be the guy to step in. I think Texas feels pretty confident about his abilities and what he's shown so far in the spring. And then you kind of get into the Brandon Baker territory, right? And so I think it'll be interesting to see where Brandon Baker sits come the spring game. Like, is he getting reps with the second team once that rolls around here in a little over 2 weeks? So,
right.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. We'll talk a lot more recruiting here coming up soon. But I'll give you kind of an option here. Do you want to do our Texas baseball segment, or do you want to just call it, get off, and then plan our next dip hole? Leave it up to you.
I'm gonna say we call it for tonight.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough. I can go back. It's a very easy process. I can go back and edit what I need to. But thank you guys all for tuning in for kind of this later episode of Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports. Again, we both have really busy schedules, especially coming off kind of a holiday weekend. So we try to fit these in where we can. Hope you guys enjoyed the Final Four preview. Enjoy the semifinals for the women on Thursday or Friday. What am I talking about? And then enjoy The men's, of course, on Saturday evening. Although we'll be back before then, definitely,
Right.
with one or two episodes. We're going to be doing an NBA centric episode on the Western Conference tomorrow night. So make sure you tune in for that. That'll be a really fun conversation. I think there's a lot that we can address in that podcast. It's going to be very similar, but a little different from our Eastern Conference episode, which we did last week. So tune in for that. We're also, I guess, come tomorrow, officially 1 week away from the Masters. So Emmy and I will need to discuss. It'll likely look very similar to what we've been doing in the past, but we will need to finalize what that's going to look like for our Masters episode, probably Monday or Tuesday of next week. And then we've got more NFL draft content and more dit holes coming for you, along with NBA playoff starting here in, 2-ish weeks officially.
Yep.
So, yeah, make sure you like and subscribe. Leave a comment. Who's winning the national championship? Who are you taking on the men's and women's side? And if you are a Texas Longhorn football fanatic, do you think Texas will get Corey Moore? Do you think they will be able to flip him from LSU? Are you confident in their abilities to get Michael Fasusi? Where do you think Texas will finish in this year's recruiting class? Is Sark going to pull in another top 5 class? Now going on, I think what will be his 4th official full recruiting class as a Texas football head coach. We will see. This is a special recruiting class because it's the one that'll be freshmen entering the first year in the SEC. So it's a big one. But anyways, thank you to Emmy. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time. Welcome.
Peace out.